Hi, I'm Josh Apter, founder of Manhattan Edit Workshop, trying to scare you with an iPad flashlight. I'd like to welcome you to a special Halloween edition of Sight, Sound, and Story. Tonight, we're going behind the lens, capturing horror films, which should be an entertaining, scary, and very informative evening for everyone. First, I want to thank you for supporting our event series. Since we've shifted online, we're doing all kinds of stuff. We're still looking forward to doing more in person. That should be happening really soon. I'd like to also thank our sponsors, OWC, American Cinema Editors, and AJA, without whom none of this would be possible. And finally, I gotta thank the folks behind making tonight's event, like Mike Valinsky, McKinley Sullivan, Janet Dalton, and of course, Jason Banky from Manhattan Edit Workshop. You make it look easy, guys. And always, I say this with online events, tech issues happen. Hopefully they won't tonight, but if they do, we'll be doing our best to get it worked out as fast as possible. Okay, so great. Let's get to the scary stuff. I'd like to hand over the mic to Jay Holben, who's an associate member of ASC, producer and director, and a contributing technical editor for American Cinematographer Magazine. Take it away, Jay.
Welcome everyone to the Manhattan Edit Workshop, Sight, Sound, and Story. This is Behind the Lens, capturing horror films, and we're here with three extraordinary cinematographers who create some truly terrifying images. And I'm going to get a chance to introduce these three masters of imagery to you. We're going to start with Mr. James Kniest, who is a seasoned cinematographer who shot all manner of projects, including feature films, television series, commercials. Recently, Kniest shot 4 episodes of the Netflix Haunting of Bly Manor, created by Mike Flanagan, who Kniest has collaborated with previously. And before Bly Manor, Kniest lensed several episodes of the horror anthology series Into the Dark, produced by Hulu and Blumhouse. And he also shot the Warner Brothers horror mystery Annabelle, directed by John R. Leonetti. Former cinematographer, it's the second installment in the Conjuring universe, and it's based on the famed paranormal authors and investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. Welcome, James. Happy to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Gentlemen.
Hi.
Big fans of both your work, by the way.
Thanks, James.
Thank you so much. Big fan of all of you.
Excellent. Next up, we have Mr. Toby Oliver, ACS. He's an award-winning cinematographer whose career extends internationally from his native Australia. Named one of Variety's top 10 cinematographers to watch in 2017, Oliver now resides in Los Angeles and has formed a remarkable and varied range of credits of feature films, documentaries, and television. He photographed Insidious, The Last Key for director Adam Robitel, and writer-director Chris Landon's comic thrillers Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day to You for Universal. He's known for his work on Jordan Peele's racially charged comedic thriller horror, Get Out, which earned an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay and 3 other nominations, including Best Picture. Previously, Oliver shot Blumhouse Productions' thriller, The Darkness, for director Greg McLean. He collected an ACS Gold Award for his cinematography on the action horror sequel Wolf Creek 2. Welcome, Toby. Happy to have you.
Very happy to be here. Thank you very much, Jay.
And also joining us, of course, is Mr. Checco Varese, ASC, who recently wrapped Dope Stick with directors Barry Levinson, Michael Cuesta, Patricia Riggin, and Danny Strong, starring Michael Keaton, Rosario Dawson, and Peter Sarsgaard. The series takes place at the epicenter of America's struggle with the opioid addiction. Varese's most recent work can be seen in Amazon Studios' original Them, Covenant, the notable horror anthology series, and previously he shot It Chapter 2, the sequel to the 2017 box office hit. In the mid-1990s, he established himself as a leading director of photography, shooting hundreds of music videos, including Dave Matthews Band Crash and Prince's Black Sweat, for which he was nominated for Best Cinematography at the 2006 MTV Music Awards. Welcome, sir. Happy to have you.
Thank you so much. My pleasure to be here with you guys.
My name is Jay Holben. I'm an associate member of the American Society of Cinematographers. I am a former or recovering cinematographer, now producer and director, and I am the contributing technical editor for American Cinematographer Magazine. And I will be your host today with these three gentlemen to discuss their work in horror films, which is something kind of near and dear to my heart. And Checco, I'd actually like to start with you with a thought about the genre of horror in general. You had some great thoughts there.
I think horror is a fantastic genre because, I mean, the horror we're talking here, it opens up all the fears we have inside, including the fears of a cinematographer to shoot a horror movie. I think horror is a cultural thing. Horror for a Western culture is something, and for me, horror is to be with very little clothing in the Antarctica, and for an Inuit, it's their bread and butter, and they're very happy to be in the middle of the snow. So horror is a cultural thing. I think directors and cinematographers, we always have to remember that. Who is your audience and who are you trying to scare other than yourself? You know, I think it's fantastic also because I like to mix the horror of reality. Like in them, for example, I think the apparitions or the creatures are less scary than the reality of what the people live in. Like also like in Jordan Peele's movies, you know, this is probably more horrible what the reality is than the apparitions or the creatures. So I always like to play with that, and I think it's a great genre that allows, especially cinematographers, costume designers, directors, everyone, to have sort of a free palette to paint with, or to dress with, or to put furniture in it, or to act in it. So it's a lot of fun to do it.
I think it's a really interesting note how important the cultural aspect is to horror, and also how cyclical the audience's craving of horror seems to be, depending upon what's happening in the general zeitgeist of society. When society is most happy and prosperous, then people love horror movies. And when we're in our darkest places, we tend to shy away from that a little bit. I think that's really fascinating. How to tell stories that appeal to those cultural aspects. But I think it's also very interesting that as cinematographers, it's your job to transcend that and to find those moments that are universal in terror and fear, right? Toby, you had some thoughts on what is attractive to you about the horror genre that is really the universal elements.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's exactly right. Your note about that it does transcend. I mean, it is cultural, but it also transcends audiences, the horror genre throughout the world, because you've got people want that experience. It's a different experience than if you're just going to see a romantic drama or something at the movies and have a nice time. People are going there to actually be scared and actually feel something maybe pretty uncomfortable, but actually craving that. And as you say, maybe it's during societal times where things are a bit more comfortable that we're actually craving this sense of uncomfortable in the theatre. And but for a cinematographer, I echo what Checco said, because it's really that an incredible freedom that you have shooting horror movies, that you're allowed to do things that you just wouldn't do if you're working in other genres. And I do a bit of other genres. I've shot drama, I've shot comedy, we all have done a bunch of different things. But horror, the rule book's a bit different, and you can actually use lenses, use the camera, use your lighting in certain ways that are obviously more extreme, or more pushing the audience into certain places with your cinematography, and you actually have a chance to do that. You're given a license to do that in a horror, when you're shooting a horror movie, and it's not a license you have when you're shooting something else. In fact, you're expected to take that license and run with it a bit, depending on the director and how far they want to push it, or perhaps what the tone of this particular movie is. But it's not about holding back and trying to be conservative when you're shooting a horror movie, and that's what makes it so much fun. And you know, I look forward to doing more of them, more movies in the genre in the future, because of that. Is that all the tools of cinematography are at your disposal, from extreme darkness, extreme camera angles, unusual shots, and creating a tone that is there primarily to unsettle the audience. Basically, throughout a horror movie, you want the audience to be thinking, shit, something's going to happen at any point in time. It doesn't matter even what scene it is. Could be just two people sitting around talking. Could be like in Get Out, where she's hypnotizing him, that there's two people sitting in armchairs. It could be any number of those kind of scenes, but you're trying to create this feeling that something's going to happen and it's probably going to be bad. And it's throughout the whole movie sort of hinges on that tone. And so that's just so much fun as a DP, to be working with your director, trying to create that, because you're actually looking for things that are unsettling or slightly off kilter, and it's the degrees of that you're looking for during a movie, and it probably progresses. You know, at the beginning of the movie, it's just a little hint here and there that things aren't so great, and then it builds, and that's always great, you know, to develop those arcs.
James, what's your take on defining the genre of horror? If somebody says we have a horror project for you, what does that mean to you, just blanket wise visually?
Well, I think that's changing a lot nowadays, and I think that nomenclature really isn't so defined as it used to be, and there's a lot of projects out there that are falling into the horror genre, but they're not slasher films. They're not necessarily you know, gratuitously gross or scary or bent on evil. I think it at first glance, I really want to read the script and find out exactly what the story is before I just automatically categorize something as a horror movie, because it isn't necessarily so, you know, and there's a lot of different subgenres now, and I think the lines are really becoming blurred in really kind of identifying what genre a film falls into, because we're taking elements from a lot of different stories nowadays and we're blending them all together. And I think that's sort of the fun thing. And I think I'm really constantly surprised at how the genre is continuing to expand and grow and incorporate all kinds of different stories, and also all kinds of different viewers. Like, the viewership for these genre films has gotten so big that it really blows me away. Coming up as a you know, as a kid and as a young adult and watching films and stuff like that, I think some of the horror stuff was really small. That was a real small sliver of the offerings. But now it seems that at any given time, a majority of the films out there could very well be classified as genre films. What subgenre that is, and you know, the details of it is really kind of blurring. But I'm really impressed by the size of the fan base and how it continues to grow. So if someone says, yeah, we have a horror flick, or, you know, want you to check it out, are you interested? Like, I don't automatically think Carrie or, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street or something like that. It could be a psychological thriller that there's maybe no blood in it. It could be, you know, any number of things that, like Toby was saying, just makes the audience feel uncomfortable. And I think that leans towards a genre film. If there's something uneasy about it, and maybe something supernatural or something menacing in it, that it's going to automatically fall into this genre, but it might not be what we traditionally would have called a horror film.
I think that the definition, as all of you have kind of touched on, is really broad. You know, it could be the slasher film, it could be a dark suspense film, it could be the torture film, it could be paranormal or monsters. And I think Checco kind of touched on one of the aspects of horror. Could be somebody just sitting in the waiting room of the hospital waiting for results of a loved one. You know, it's all kind of personal and cultural and really very broad in definition. But at the same time, it is a genre, right? So we're visually, we are doing something to define that. Sorry, Check, I'll cut you off.
No. I finish. I just have a thought.
Please.
I agree with what we're hearing 100%. And I also think, I don't know if this has happened to you guys, but I remember a few years ago, my agent called me and says, hey, we have this commercial. It's some kids commercial. And I'm like, great, I'm free, I'm fine. The agency would like to know if you can shoot kids. And I'm like, yes, I have a device to lower the camera enough for the kids. And I think I feel comfortable with having the camera low. My agent didn't quite catch the irony of it. I never got the commercial, of course, because I should have sent them 27 commercials with kids eating cornflakes, and I didn't have. We have a little bit of a need I would say in Hollywood, probably only, or in North America, to sort of classify things. No, so it's like you go to the doctor and it's like ethnicity. Sorry, I'm getting my skin treated. Why do you need to know where I was born? Anyway, dentist, And in the same thing is horror. I don't remember a more horrible moment than Saving Private Ryan, when the young German soldier is up in the stairs and the young American soldier finds the German soldier, and the German soldier, almost like in a love scene, goes where he put the bayonet in his heart. I don't know if you guys remember that scene. For me, it beats any horror movie I've ever seen in my life. It's the scariest thing. I still dream about that moment, and I think it's brilliant. Is that a horror movie? Probably not. Probably yes. Who knows? Dope Sick. I just finished something about the opioid pandemic. I think it's one of the most horrific things that has happened in this country, and it's unique to North America. That your doctor gives you the drug that is going to kill you, and that's horror. Is it classified? No. So I agree with you guys. I don't know if it's a horror. I mean, the classic, Monster of the Blue Lagoon, whatever, lagoon coming out with the rubber suit and scaring everyone, screaming. Okay, that is a classic horror or something. Everything else, I'm not sure, other than the commercial with the kids that I for sure wasn't horror.
There was a point in my career as a young cinematographer that I kind of thought the whole genre labeling thing, you just throw it out the window. Let's try to break that a little bit. And I got a short film that was a comedy, and I thought, why does comedy have to be broadly lit and flat? And I'm going to like this like a drama. And it didn't work. It actually was a completely failed experiment, and it was a real education for me. There is a certain reason why we do certain visual styles and looks for certain fields, right? And for the broad classification of horror, there is a certain look that we're going to be reaching for, right? James, let me start with you on that. And how do you think you define the look of something in a suspense or horror world?
Well, again, like what Checco said is, there's a lot of tools out there, and going back to what you said, I think we've kind of become conditioned to identify a certain feeling with a certain type of look, or colors even, or brightness, and we use those tools to convey that message subconsciously and visually, to set the tone so the audience is already sort of prepped to understand what this scene is about, or how to digest it emotionally. And I think initially, and one thing that I do enjoy about shooting these types of projects is it automatically it gives you a sense or a license to play things darker and more shadowy and more mysterious, and I think that's really fun. It was especially fun in the film days, when you were the only one that really knew how much you could see in the shadows. as opposed to craft service. It was like, hey, I can see the monster in the corner, guys. So, automatically, I think it's, you inherently are going to play things darker, right? And then when you want to, you can make things super bright and shocking, because again, it's about the ride for the audience, right? And you want to take them up, 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 and then down, 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 and all around, and try to use the visuals to guide the ride, the adventure of watching the film. And so initially, I would think, hey, great, we're going to do a scary movie or a genre type film. We're going to have a lot of dark scenes, a lot of dark elements, and then we're going to shock people out of that darkness with hard cuts to bright sunlight or things like that. And so I think you do have a lot more license to play in the extremes on both levels, with both shadows and light and color. That's something that I'm trying to do more and more with, and it's so easy now with the LED lights to really mix colors together and use different colors to try to bring out different emotions and set different tones for scenes. It's not like, for in the days past where we would have piles and piles of expensive gel on the floor when we were done. We can just dial it in now on your iPad and really experience, or at least preview a little bit what I think the scene will happen like, and what the audience may or may not feel when that scene plays, and sample it to some degree. So I think just darkness is the first thing that comes to mind visually.
Toby, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you should talk about darkness, of course, because it is a fundamental part of horror, and certainly the way the genre is traditionally seen, because often it's a kind of what you don't really see really clearly. That's the most scariest thing. It's like a shadow, or it's sort of a shape, and you're not quite sure, the audience isn't really sure what it is, or maybe you hardly see it at all and you just hear things. And that is almost your most important tool when you're trying to create that tension. I mean, I've done a lot of movies for Blumhouse. One of their favorite things is the jump scare moment, and I'm sure, of course, tons of other horror producers also have those kind of, you got to have X number of jump scares in the film. And I remember the Blumhouse execs used to say, look, we've got to have a jump scare in the first 20 minutes or 15 minutes, and then we've got to have another one, another sort of 15 minutes after that, and so on and so forth. And of course, you build that up, you can't see something, it's very dark, and then suddenly, bang, the person or the creature or whatever it is there fully lit, and bang, you get the jump. So that all those kind of methods are sometimes sort of almost formulaic. You actually, in some movies, you've got to do that because that's what's required. In fact, that's what the audience will want. They're expecting that. So you have to fulfill that in the rules of the genre. That's not always the case, of course, especially what James was saying earlier about the confluence of different genres mixing together what really is a horror movie. It's not as pure, perhaps, as it once was when the monster in the rubber suit was coming out of a swamp. It's actually a whole lot of different things. That movie I shot, Happy Death Day, is a bit like that, because you've got a slasher movie plus a sort of college comedy kind of, then mixed up with sort of a bit of sci-fi, and it's sort of all of those things sort of weaving together. And the skill of the writer and the director and the editor and everyone else has got to kind of create a seamless kind of whole where you're traveling. And as the cinematography, during the shoot, you're actually traveling between these sort of genres into another. So, this is the horror, this is a whole horror sequence. Okay, so this is going to feel a bit scarier, but then we're going to come out of that and it's going to be a funny scene. So let's readjust a little bit without changing the whole look and feel of the movie. You've kind of got to make those adjustments. But talking about darkness and the difference between shooting in the film days, which the three of us have probably done a fair bit of film, probably back in the day. No one else really knew how dark it was going to be. That was purely you were setting the exposure. No one else had a clue. And the director would say, is this going to be dark? Are we going to make sure it's dark enough? Because I don't want to see any of that stuff. And he said, yeah, don't worry about it. We're going to make sure it's dark. And I've had plenty of experiences where directors are looking at a video split monitor, the little tiny little feed off the film camera. And then they can see everything and they're going, oh, this is terrible. We've got to make it way darker. Can't make it too much darker. You won't have any exposure on the film. And so there were battles with that in those days. I remember one director was doing a movie in Australia, which wasn't a horror movie, but it was supposed to be in dark tunnels and lit by candlelight and so on, and was shot on film. And he'd be looking at his video split saying, it's way too bright, Toby. I want it way darker than this. And I'm like, you got the light meter out and you're going, this is a problem. So, and a couple of scenes actually were a bit too dark. And I said, see, now you can't see the guys because, oh yeah, right, yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah. And it was actually a little bit of a battle. But more recently, shooting digitally, I've had not the same problem because everyone can see what you're getting on the monitor. It's all very clear. But that's also sometimes a problem because, again, I remember experience doing a movie called Insidious, The Last Key, and Adam Robitel and Lee Winnell are both wonderful guys. And Lee was the producer and actor in it, and Adam was directing, and they just wanted some scenes to be really, really dark on the monitor. Like they just wanted it so dark that you sort of like, if I don't put something in there, there'll be no image, even digitally. So it was sort of, it's a lesson learned. Sometimes you've got to, you can go there, but you know, later on in post, you want a little bit of some sort of image there that you can sort of tweak around with. You don't want that to be so tiny, a little bit on the waveform that you'd actually end up with nothing. And I've, you know, that's a bit scary for a cinematographer. So you're right on the edge of what's even technically viable. And they're saying, oh no, we want it darker. We don't want to see that when we look into that corner. It's got to be like, you can't see anything. Yeah, but we'll do it later. We'll make it darker in post. And it's actually just even that bridge of saying, let's shoot it, have a little bit here now, and we'll do whatever we want later. It's sometimes hard to get there, even when they can see everything. So you end up learning a few tricks from those things. Is then have a nice heavy LUT built into the camera that pushes everything down, make it darker, and your exposure in reality is a little bit higher than that. So you've always got something to play with a bit later on. But yeah, the levels of darkness can be super important because it can sometimes hinge all upon that. You know, there's some directors are very, very fussy about precisely how light or dark it is, and others not so much, and they'll leave it up to the cinematographer to create that mood. And so it's always fun exploring how you work differently with different directors in those situations as well.
Sometimes you just got to go to the director's monitor and turn down the brightness.
That's
the other way. I have to admit, I've been guilty of that too a couple of times.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's a funny thing nowadays, and for me, it was a bit of an adjustment. With, you know, coming up through film, we would expose for the shadows and print for the highlights, and now it's pretty much opposite. We expose for the highlights, we're protecting stuff from clipping, and then we're printing for the shadows. And it's, you know, for me, it was a little bit of a rethinking and a retooling. And I still have to remind myself of that when I go in and light a scene and I set exposures and LUTs and stuff like that. And now with everything finishing in HDR, but us not monitoring in HDR for the most part. I don't know, maybe you gentlemen are able to, but I've yet to be able to monitor on set in HDR.
Same. Yeah, I've asked for it, and it just seems to be an insurmountable thing most of the time. Yeah,
$30,000 for an HDR monitor. And so, you know, I'm back to like a little bit of nail biting and like, you know, hey, are those windows really blowing out in HDR? I don't know. Like, you know, I've had problems where in the DI, I'm doing a big DI on Bly during COVID. I was doing it remotely on an iPad. Like, I don't know. HDR, you know?
Yeah, I did that too, and there's nothing fun about that.
So it's been kind of fun in the sense where, you know, we would shoot a bunch of film and you can't wait to see dailies. You can't, because there's that alchemy that we miss, I think, in today's world of digital, where everybody walks away from set knowing exactly what you shot and it's there. And you know, for years is we, you know, the focus pullers were the first ones on set going through dailies, making sure things were in focus. But now everybody knows. But back to the darkness thing, it's been interesting to rethink it all digitally. And now with this HDR thing that's kind of crept up, you know, I've had problems where I thought something blew out, but I can see the grommets in the 12 by Muzz that I thought I was blowing out now, you know, and so it's still, there's still, for me at least, there's still some trepidation in that whole process between darkness and lightness, you know. If everything's down the middle, it's fine. It's the extremes of it.
Yeah, but that, and those extremes are kind of where you want to be playing often when you're doing a horror genre. You're at that extreme, you know, you that's the point, you know, that's where you want to be.
Yeah.
Checco, I want to give you a chance to chime in on how you would define the look. I mean, we've talked about darkness, of course, but in camera movements, in composition, in lens choice, does any of that play into any specific rules for you when it comes to the genre?
To paraphrase a master, you know, he says, painting with light, you know, Vittorio has this phrase and book. I think what we're talking here, the three of us are painting with shadows, you know, so you start by deciding what your canvas is, you know, and your canvas, hopefully it's a conversation that happened at least for 5 minutes with the production designer and the director, and you start with that. I do believe that this is my approach. I usually take the horror sense out of a script. You know, I read the script, and I mean, short of a slasher movie, like It Chapter 2, for example. It Chapter 1 was a wonderful movie, and I had the honor of doing It Chapter 2. It's a drama about a bunch of kids, now grown-ups, that have a lot of traumas from childhood, whether it's sexual orientation, happiness in the marriage, the beaten wife, and the other one that is a betrayer and it cheats on everyone. So to me, it's a drama. It happens to be a clown that wants to kill them, but that's sort of the subplot. And that's what interests me, you know, how to approach that drama and that human suffering in the most naturalistic way. Yet it has to be, you have to believe, if the naturalistic part, if the real part where the people are having a drink, you don't believe it's happening, then you kill the suspension of disbelief when the monster comes, you know, because you have to believe that these people are at the bar having a drink. So you make it nice and dramatic and darkest, and Jessica Chastain has to look $100 million because she does, and I can help, you know, and you do that. And then you turn around and she goes to the restroom, and all of a sudden the restroom is full of blood. When that happens, I think the audience has to believe that it's a real restroom or a real stall or whatever it is that happens. So I think I agree with you guys, which is the fact that the jump scare or I think horror, it's I wouldn't say a formula, but it's like an algorithm. You know, it happens on page 12 of the script, there has to be some sex. And then it has to go bad, and she has to open the door, and something has to happen really bad on page 27. And that is a marriage. It's between me, the director, the editor, the sound editor, the composer, because it all has to happen. You know, it's like open the door and it sounds, and then you open the door and turns on the light and nothing happens, and the audience goes, ah, and then he closes the door, turns, and the monster is here. That, and here is very bright because my garden is outside, but that's where you need the monster to be. So it's an algorithm that we all have to play and understand. So I have long conversations, even with the director, and when the director allows me, a long conversation with the editor, long conversations with the composer, because I want to understand what they want to do. Obviously, it's through the director. It's not that I call them on a side, but I want to understand what they're doing and what they want to do. Because at the end of the day, it's an algorithm that I don't know if the algorithm is a word, but it's like math, you know, it has to all feel in the right place, you know, because if not, if there is a dissonant note, it's one of those genres that it's either work or it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, it's tragic, because if you don't get jump scared, there is nothing worse than watching a horror movie on an airplane, because you look and it's like, sorry, can I have another drink? And then the jump scare happened, you know. It is a theater experience. Unfortunately, hopefully we'll go back to the theaters more often, but it's a theater experience, you know. So, and that's what you hope when you shoot the movie. Then if you're watching it in your iPhone while, you know, being driven to work, then it probably doesn't work.
I don't know. I think all of you have done work that if I saw it on a plane, I would be hesitant to get into the car once I've landed without checking underneath it or checking the back seat, or, you know, making sure that the things are safe. It's that that lingering feeling of dread. It is very successful in all of your works. One thing that I kind of want to touch on a little bit is the budget arena. That horror films in general tend to be able to be lower budget, smaller productions, and can still be extraordinarily successful. Toby, Get Out is a great example of that. But there's a lot of limitations that come with low budget production. Does that help or hinder the horror cinematographer?
Oh, well, I'll start with that. But look, I don't think it has to. It just depends on what the ambition of the movie itself is. And so, and I guess I've done a few jobs for Jason Blum of Blumhouse, and he's very specific about the budgets and the ambitions of these movies, and most of them are structured specifically so they all happen in one location. There's a limited number of people in it, and there might be a bit of shooting away from that location at the beginning of the movie and maybe a bit at the end, but essentially 80% of the movie is going to happen in one house, say, for example. And Get Out was a bit like that too. Most of it sort of happened in the one house. There's a really clear reason for that. It is cheaper. They don't have to move around. You can have a smaller unit and so on and so forth. And he has a sort of formula where the budget is pretty fixed. It's a fixed budget of 5 million or 10 million or whatever it might be. And you can't, the director can't really go beyond that. I mean, that is it. And so far it's proven to be successful. Does it detract? I mean, obviously you're not going to have giant, battle scenes and car crashes and huge amounts of visual effects in any of those kind of movies. But you can have a few key moments. There's enough money to do a few important things, and that can be enough. In Happy Death Day, for example, we had it's also a Blumhouse movie. We did have a scene where the girl gets trapped inside a car that gets blown up by the killer with a whole pile of gas, and the car blows up. Yeah, and so we did that, and we blew up an actual car and shot it in high speed, and we did all of that kind of stuff, as the script says. But that was probably one of the more bigger set pieces, blowing up a car. So that was we could do that within the scope of this $5 million movie. But it does require everything to be super lean and clean and mean. The whole production has to be this set up from the very beginning. It's set up in this way, and I guess that's how the Blumhouse machine works. Everyone knows what they're getting into, and does it affect it? Just again, if the story is suited to be able to be made for that budget, like Get Out, which we shot in 23 days. It can be really successful because there's no, as long as all those points of story points and moments are captured and captured properly, then that's what you need to try and achieve. We also get a chance to do, for these kind of Blumhouse movies, we get a chance to do a reshoot. So you'll do a couple of extra days of shooting, maybe months later on after they've edited the film. And that ends up being a really cost-effective way then for them to make sure the movie's going to be as good as it can be. So I guess they must hold back a little bit of money for those reshoots, because every Blumhouse movie I've done has had a 1 to 3 day reshoot added on after they've cut the movie to just really tweak, usually the beginning or the ending or some moment in the story that's really critical. And
is that after audience previews?
Often, usually after audience previews. Yeah. So these movies, and if the audience previews show real potential, they'll spend that bit of extra money to go back and reshoot the problem areas. And it's all pretty carefully thought through and worked out, that and not a ton of it is left to chance. But on this other hand, the directors and the writers of these movies get quite a lot of freedom. There isn't, because the budget is very low, you don't have execs and producers and studio execs hanging around on set. Basically, the directors have, within the constraints of that budget and time, they have pretty free rein to, do what they want to do. And so it's a two-way street. There's a lot of freedom on one hand and but clear restrictions on the other hand. And maybe that does work, particularly for horror. And maybe it's a really good, it's a good thing to have those restrictions, because they can really focus what's important.
James, is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I have a lot of perspective on budgets, and a lot of commentary that I should probably be very selective of what I say. But I think, and first I just want to say, Toby, one thing that I've really tried to do nowadays is I say additional photography, because I always feel like there's some negative connotation to reshoots, that term, it's like, well, reshoot, what happens? Like, no, everything's fine. We're just adding some scenes, or we're, doing something like that. Cause I don't know, I had a situation years ago that sort of made me develop that perspective. I also think that like you started to touch on that, at $5, $8, $10 million, it's a pretty nominal investment for the studios, and they can really risk to lose it, quite frankly. And so
that's right.
They do give the team a lot of creative license, hemmed in by the budgetary constraints of like, look, you only get 28 days, with a couple extra if you're lucky. And, you got 3 crane days, and, maybe you only have 10 condor days in your budget or whatever. And so, it's a little bit of a challenge, but we really are problem solvers, not only cinematographers, but producers and production designers and stuff. And we work together to figure out, okay, well, what are the problems? And, usually in that paradigm, the first problem is money. So, all right, we don't have enough money, and conversely, we don't have enough time. So how do we shape our shoot to fit within those parameters that they're given and still try to make something great? And that's where we get to put our heads together and figure out what's the best bang for the buck. All right, what tools can I use and be approved that I can use for other purposes or repurpose them? And that's not only, lenses and lights and camera support, it's sets and what set walls, what sets can be turned around easy, what set dressing can be repurposed. And so we'll collectively do that. And that's really the fun part. I mean, for me, one of the funnest parts of production is the teamwork aspect. We're all in this together. And I think we build a lot of really tight bonds when we problem solve together. And that's rewarding. And again, I think that when they test a show or they test a movie and they feel like that it merits additional investment for more shoot days, that's a really good sign. And if they don't, then it's a drop of water in the bucket for them, as far as like, oh, studio lost $10 million on, and they'll recoup it somehow eventually, but they don't put so much into marketing. Where conversely, if they think it's a great product already, they're going to polish it with a couple extra days, and they're going to dump a ton of money into the marketing of it. And that, I think, is the formula that was a Blumhouse thing, and now I see it's Warner Brothers, it's all these other companies have kind of fallen along. I've had the pleasure of working at Blumhouse a few times, and Jason really has his finger on the pulse of how to make money. And I think some of these bigger studios have looked at this lean and mean streamline approach and have kind of adapted it for some of their big blockbuster movies have started out that way, or at least the franchise has started out that way. Like Annabelle, I think we did, for all said and done, was close to 10 million, and it made $260 million. Like, and then the next Annabelle 2 or whatever it was, you know, a $50 million movie, and they didn't call me, but it's, you know, it's just sort of how it goes. They start out with something, and if it works, it starts a whole new thing, and then they're able to put more money into it. I've also worked on you know, larger budget shows and stuff like that, and we're still strapped for money. We still have to make good financial decisions in terms of staffing, management, equipments, you know, choices, that kind of stuff. I think the cinematographer's role, at least in my tenure, has changed a lot to become more of a management role, and less just a creative visual role. You know, like I personally get looked to a lot to figure out equipment orders and budgets and staffing and marrying days and marrying sets and locations together to help make everything fit in this financially constrained box. And I didn't know that, or didn't anticipate that going into it. I came up as a gaffer, and like I didn't see some of that behind the scenes stuff. I was like, you know, it was all about the image making. And I also worked with some older cinematographers that, you know, I think we touched a little bit about this the other day, is, you know, they wouldn't shoot till the light was right. You know, like I can't imagine a world where I say that now. Like, we got 7 pages, bro. You got to make the light, you know, make it work, like figure it out. And so that's a lot of my job, is figuring out how to get the page count done as best looking as possible with the time and the money given. And I feel that as cinematographers, we have a giant target on our back if we don't make those benchmarks. You know, like if there's overtime and you know, like, and oftentimes I get handed one-liners that I'm like, there's no way, like, you're kidding, right? Oh, and there's a company move in the middle of the day, like, you know, and we're just forced to make it work. So, and then we have a director that wants to shoot Gone with the Wind, and so it's a lot of our job is I think somebody mentioned it earlier, is like we're kind of the glue in all these different departments and their desires to make something great. We have to kind of balance it all, like the realities of it all, and make it all work. And it can be super rewarding and super taxing at the same time. But I think it's the new job description as a cinematographer, is largely management, especially given the tools that we have now. You know, we shot 100 ASA film, and it was hard to make things work, you know. Now, oh, just put the camera at 2,500. You know, it's really not as much about the image making as it is about the completing the project on time and on budget with the best look possible and the best experience for everybody, you included.
That was a mini masterclass in the business of being a cinematographer. I want to get to a chance to see all of your work and talk about it a little bit. But Check, I want to give you a chance to address that question if you have any thoughts on it before we jump into some clips.
I basically took notes of what the boys just said and agree on every single one of them. There's a saying in Mexico, depending on the frog, the size of the stone you throw at it. You know, there's a big frog, you need a big stone. There is a small frog, you need a small stone. And that's the budget, you know. So I had a conversation a few weeks ago, and I said, well, the cheapest place to make this day is in the typewriter. And so you retype that scene, you know, you type it smaller. Anything else, it's out of the question. I cannot make it faster. I cannot make the day go faster. I cannot make the sun go slower. You want to make this day? Go to a typewriter, type, no, interior bathroom, and here we go. You know, instead of exterior ocean in the beach, interior bathroom. That's the only place I can see it happening. So you guys figure it out. I'm here to serve and protect. I can help you, but there's a certain point that I cannot do more. And I do agree with that. And it's not always about the budget, it's about the appetite. You can have $100 million and still feel constrained because there is not enough money. And you can have $100,000, maybe not, like $5 million, and feel that you have enough time because it's written for that, and it's conceived for that, and it's imagined for that, and it's in love with that concept. Whether it's Blumhouse or whether it's an indie movie somewhere, indie or lower budget or whatever budget is, if it's conceived to fit that box, it's great. If you try to put an elephant inside a shoebox, it won't fit. It doesn't matter how flexible the shoebox is. So it all gets back to having filmmakers solving problems, but those problems should be solved on paper. Once we solve them on paper, it's very simple. If you want me to solve it in reality, well, it's gonna take a lot of kicking and screaming and pushing around to make it happen. And it may not look good, and it's okay, properly well exposed.
Well, on the subject of properly well exposed, let's take a look at one of your pieces of work that is extraordinarily exposed. And Jason, if you don't mind, we can cue up the trailer for It Chapter 2 and take a look at that.
Something happens to you when you leave this town. The farther away, the hazier it all gets. But me, I never left. I remember all of it.
To the losers.
We made an oath.
Swear? If it isn't dead, if it ever comes back, we'll come back to it.
We didn't stop it.
Pennywise.
The clown. We can't let it happen again.
Hello?
Kid! Hello. Please. For 27 years, I dreamt of you. I craved you. I missed you.
We need to finish it. For good.
I've seen all of us die. It consumes us from the inside until we don't have a choice anymore.
You lied. And I died. You lied. And I died.
How much was the original an inspiration to you, and what were the other visual inspirations to you when you got this project?
It's very interesting because the first of this later incarnation of it was done by the director, Yandy Muschietti, and a wonderful cinematographer, Chong. And when they offered me, I watched the first one. I didn't watch it on the theater, so I watched the first one. And in this one, there's a flashback to the kids, whatever, 20 years before. So, and that was shot with anamorphics, and the director didn't want it to go back to anamorphics, but I still had it to honor what my predecessor did and try to make it as beautiful as he did, or at least try. But also the suspension of the disbelief with the audience, it had to feel like that was an outtake of the other movie that I never used, or at least it happened exactly at the same time. So it was quite interesting to be the, and I'm gonna use the wrong term because it's not additional photography, but it was quite funny to be the reshoot guy of that movie that 2 years ago somebody shot, because I basically had to, okay, let me look at this. Ooh, where's the sun? And oh, are we in the same place? Yeah, but it was September instead of July or whatever. So I used spherical lenses, the mini hogs that have an anamorphic bouquet and an anamorphic flare for that segment. But then when he got to the so-called contemporary segment with the adults, then it was carte blanche for me. You know, that was my movie. The other one was an homage to my predecessor. The other part was, okay, let's have fun. This is me. You know, this is how I do it. You know, and it was fun. And there is a little moment there, and I'm sure it happens to all of us, but there is a little moment there where James McAvoy goes into a country fair looking for a little boy, and then he goes through the whatever the clowns going like that, and the director goes, I wish we had one more. What can we do? And I don't know why. I said, oh, we should do a house of mirrors. As soon as I said that, I'm like, holy beep, what have I done to myself? They all go, oh my God, it's a great idea. And I'm like sinking in the chair saying, okay, I just committed professional suicide. So I sat down with the production designer, and one of the art directors, a friend, and he was very wise. He built a 1/8, whatever, 1/10 scale of little mirrors, tiny little mirrors on some kind of plastilin. And we draw it, and I would spend an afternoon in his office moving these mirrors left and right and having a little lipstick camera for $5 on Amazon. Or sorry, not medical commercial, $5 in a store. And I attach it with like some rubber band in a pencil, and I went like that. Oops, I see the camera. So we tweak the mirror. And oops, I see the camera. So we tweak the other mirror. And I'm proud to say, besides the special effect, the visual effects that has to be done, on the day of the shoot, we saw the Steadicam operator once. And those are real mirrors.
That's amazing.
Those are real mirrors. I mean, plexi mirrors. And some of them are one-way mirrors. So I could do a dolly between the mirror, obviously, like James was saying, at 2500 ASA, you know, because there is like 3 NDs in the mirrors. And the thing you see in the ceiling is, oh my God, we're over budget. This is a $70 million movie. We're over budget. What do we put in the ceiling? And I said, okay, LCDs, like the things you put in front of the silks that are little squares made of whatever. The big bounces, light control tools, you know. So we stretch LCD on top and we put the lights on top. So if you carefully look at it, it's just a bunch of LCDs that we had in the truck, and we solved it. So that $70 million movie became very handicraft and became very artisanal. I don't know if you say in English, but like an artisan. And I'm very proud of that, because even though there is a special effects and it's visual effects and the tongue is not that long and they extend it and who knows how much money they spend on that, the actual set and the way of shooting it, we could have done it for my niece that is coming out of film school tomorrow. And that was made me very happy, even though I had heartburn for a week when I said House of Mirrors.
So that was your fault. Well played. Well played.
Completely. Self-inflicted wound.
Checco, I love what you said. I love what you said about that. Like, you know, I often tease all the time, like, we have $1 million worth of lights and we end up taking a bulb and a wad of tape and we stick it on there. And it's like, it doesn't really matter what's happening behind the lens. It's how it's conveyed or how it looks on the screen. And it's so much fun to find lo-fi solutions to things, you know, and you know, and I came up being pretty scrappy, like, just push me down the hallway on the skateboard and you can't tell. It looks like, you know, how did you get that Steadicam shot? I'm all Steadicam. We didn't have Steadicam. You know, the 30 frames that I pushed myself down the hall. And that's so much fun to find those solutions in the moment and find stuff that may not be designed to solve that problem, but you've applied it that way. And, you know, that is the arts and crafts of it. And I find that still in this day, with all the tools we have, we're still making stuff up all day long, no matter what the budget.
Of course.
Of course, that's the job, right?
Yeah.
Let's take a look at some of the brilliance that you've made up in Annabelle.
John, wake up.
What's it?
Next door, I heard a scream.
Stay here. Go check it out.
John? Is everything all right?
Oh my God, you're covered in blood.
Go back inside. It's not mine. It's not. Go back inside and call an ambulance right now. Go!
I like your dolls.
You survived. You don't come out the other side of something like this weaker. What is there left to be scared of?
This is the last of them. How did that get in there? I swear I threw it out.
Things must have got mixed up. There, she fits right in. There are things happening that I can't explain.
We should talk to someone.
I don't think what you're experiencing is a ghost.
Sometimes demons can attach themselves to objects.
What do I do? Protect your family.
Who are you?
This was my real first experience working for a proper studio. So I was a little nervous, to say the least. And again, Johnny was so supportive. He likes to use all the cinematic tools, split diopters, selective focus, handheld, Steadicam stuff, all these things. So the toolbox is really open, but I think he expects it to be applied in traditional ways, which was really fun for me because I was so supported. Only 2 times did Johnny have anything to say about the photography. And one time he came in and he looked around and said, it's a little bright. And that was it. And so I just kind of took everything down. And then another time he came in and he said, it's a little dark. And that was the only 2 things he said pretty much during shooting. Of course, we had our pre-pro and pre-production conversations and references and all that kind of stuff. But that was really fun to do on a Warner. We actually got it in the first take. And there is an edit in there that's hidden that we had planned on. And I find myself often in this situation where directors want to do oneers. I think it's a really cool crafting, and it shows good directing and good teamwork from everybody and all the actors hitting their marks and the focus pullers and the lighting cues and all that stuff. It's a dance, it's a choreography that we all do as a company. So it's super fun, but I'm always encouraging them to find, hey, let's design a place that we can bury and edit in so that, you know, God forbid we're struggling with a segment of the one, or that we can at least have a way to, you know, to ditch off and make it work in. We didn't need it, but we designed it, and he just used part of one take and part of the other take, and it's a pillar in the front yard that the camera goes by. All the rest was done as a oneer, and I'm sorry you guys couldn't hear the sound because it really does play into it. There's a line where the cult person says, "I love your dolls," and that forces Annabelle Wallis, the actress, to turn and see her holding the Annabelle doll, which, you know, launches a whole franchise for the studio. But it was a really, really fun job for me working with Johnny and working with that studio and starting the Annabelle kind of franchise.
Very cool. Thank you. That's a truly horrific sequence. And horrific in it's reality. And it felt a little bit like the Manson kind of cult coming in to attack this woman situation. Which
I think that was some of I think that was some of the inspiration. Johnny looked a lot towards Rosemary's Baby for the look and feel of this. I think we were trying to lean into that period, and which I love. I'm super enamored by period pieces as a viewer and as a camera person. Like, I really, really like trying to replicate the tone and textures of certain periods, and it's really fun again to collaborate with the art department and the production designer and especially the costume designer. And now, like, I just did a bunch of period stuff in Canada on Mike Flanagan's new show, The Midnight Club, and we had a hard time finding period cars that are actually up to snuff in terms of running and working properly. As we get more and more away from those periods, I think it's going to be harder and harder for us to find such a variety of cars to fit, and anything mechanical, really, I guess.
Yeah, fortunately, that is an issue. Toby, I want to take a look at Get Out, extraordinarily powerful film that starts relatively unhorrific. And then there's slow buildup of these strange things. And the moment that we're going to look at here is really the moment where we feel, oh, wow,
it's the turning point.
We're in for a hell of a ride. I would love to take a look at this scene from Get Out.
So you're comfortable enough, right?
It's perfect. Thanks.
Sure. You want to know how it works?
You just dangle a pocket watch in front of people's faces. Is that it?
You watch a lot of TV.
When I was a kid.
Now you're feeling very sleepy. We do use focal points sometimes to guide someone into a state of heightened suggestibility.
Heightened suggestibility.
That's right. That's right. Do you smoke in front of my daughter?
I'm gonna quit, I promise.
That's my kid. That is my kid. You understand? What about your mother?
What about her? Wait, are we?
Where were you when she died?
I don't want to think about that. Home. Watching TV.
Do you hear the TV? What do you hear?
Rain.
Rain. It was raining. You hear the rain?
Mm-hmm.
You hear it? Find it. Tell me when you found it. Come here, Chris. Look at me.
Found it.
Where was your mom?
She was coming home. She wasn't home.
From work? And what do you do?
Nothing.
Nothing?
I just sat there.
You didn't call anyone?
No.
Why not?
I don't know. I just thought that if I did, it'd make it real.
it was your fault. How do you feel now?
I can't move.
You can't move.
Why can't I move?
You're paralyzed. Just like that day when you did nothing. You did nothing. Now, sink into the floor.
Wait.
Sink. Now you're in the sunken place.
Heavy.
Man, that is a powerful scene. Oh, wow. As she's approaching the camera there, I found myself actually physically backing off.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about creating that aspect of it.
Yeah.
Such good.
Well, it's interesting because Jordan Peele, of course, wrote this amazing script. And the movie itself, other than the beginning and the end, doesn't really deviate from that too much. And what, in conjunction with the script, of course, he wanted to be, being a first-time director, he wanted to be super, super prepared going into this. He didn't want to leave anything to chance. He hadn't ever been in that process before as a director. So he didn't know, what can go wrong or how his vision might get diluted or whatever. So we did these storyboards, which I was, collaborated a bit with that. Some of it had been done before I even came on board, and we collaborated. And then we did, in that house, we also did photo boards. So we roped in the producers once we had that location in pre-production. This is probably a week before we started filming. We went into the house and had the producers sort of pretend to be the actors in all these positions in the house. And actually, I took stills of every single shot that we were going to shoot in the movie. And Jordan he sort of wanted the storyboards kind of transplanted to the exact location that we had. So he was being really specific. And this scene is a case in point of that too. But it's a bit of both, because it was quite precisely storyboarded. But then, and we had decided that we were going to do a push in onto each actor sitting in the chairs once they sat there, and she starts doing the teacup and starts talking to him, starting to bring out the truth out of him. The idea was, we'll push slowly in on him and we'll push slowly in on her. And it's something that's probably been done before. But it's interesting how it all kind of then melds in the edit, because they played with that, because we ended up close up on her earlier than we end up close up on him. We didn't do a ton of takes. There's probably maybe because he was going through this incredible performance. We'd start off normal and then end up in tears streaming down his face. It's all in one shot. So there's only so many times you can do that to an actor. And I think we did the full take twice. And then I think we picked up some moments once he was in that state at the end. And and so it was a case of then in the edit, the timing of those push-ins was then manipulated a little bit. So you find that we end up close on her once she's starting to get into the actual hypnotizing, but we're still back on him because he's not quite sure what's going on and he hasn't quite started divulging it. But then at the moment he says, what about my mother? And then he starts reliving that experience that ultimately takes him into his own sunken place. Then the camera starts slowly pushing in on him. And we just had a dolly track set up, alongside the two chairs. And actually, so as we push in, we're slowly sort of becoming a little bit more 3/4 on him as well. I don't think we even had a slider. It was kind of end up in front. It was sort of pretty lo-fi. But those elements that we sort of, it was just sort of the building blocks, because then it was really put together in the edit, the actual build up of that moment. But it was important to get all of those building blocks and give Jordan and his editor, Gregory Plotkin, the chance to actually build up that tension and build
It is
up
quite a
the scene.
powerful choice to be closer to her, especially wider closer to her, and then a little more distance on him. It makes her so overpowering, and it's a beautiful choice.
And it could have been cut the other way around, or it could have been cut with both sitting wide, because we had shot a version where we would have sat back and only pushed in on her later. I think they were the two different main takes. We changed the time we were going to push in. We did one version of the scene and we saw how it was going to play. So then we decided, okay, on the second take, we'll hold back, because so Daniel Kaluuya is going to go through that whole thing again, get back to normal. Start off the scene sort of, jokey and happy and kind of just wondering what's going on, and then end up in that place again. And we held back and we only started dolling until I think after halfway, started pushing in. So that was sort of, we had the storyboard, but then you realize what the actors are going to do, and you adjust accordingly and make those creative decisions to try and to really make it work. And then he goes into the sunken place, and that again was written in the script as going into a subconscious. We had storyboards for those angles, and they're pretty close to what the storyboards are. And then it was the case of figuring out with Jordan, well, how are you going to create that? What are the elements that make him feel like he's in this floating sort of world? And that was something that we figured out in pre-production. And it was sort of, I've said it before several times, where it came up with the idea of using sort of the elements of a dry for wet technique, where we'd shoot on a dry stage, make it look like it's underwater. So we took a couple of those elements, like shooting at high speed. So all of that stuff's shot at 200 frames a second on the Alexa, and then using fans out of shot to ripple his clothes. So we made it early, just knowing that we were going to do that. We made sure that our costume designer, Nadine Hayter, had that kind of sort of loose sort of sweatshirt and sort of gym gear that he was wearing, so it would flap and blow around, because he doesn't have any, obviously he's only got super short hair, so we couldn't get any effect out of that. So we have to make sure his clothes could tell that feeling. That sense that he is floating as we shoot it in slow motion. So we just had him hanging on a wire. It wasn't even a proper stage. It was just like a community center type civic center in Alabama. And we put just solids around him, hung him from a wire, which was from the ceiling. Of course, he couldn't move. He was just hanging in one place. And so we pushed the camera around him it was really just a dolly arm. I don't think we even had a crane arm to deal with that, and to create the sense that he was falling through. And then visual effects helped, we would pull back and that tiny figure dropping through the blackness. Of course, that was all, the extra width of that shot was created in visual effects, as were the little particles sort of floating through him. But most of it was, captured you got to meld those things together, knowing there's not a massive visual effects budget either, that you've got to create as much as you can in camera, and then they can just enhance that. But really it was sort of a synergy of collaboration, just creating that whole sequence and trying to give Jordan the vision that he wanted, and it ended up working really well and ended up being pretty close to what he'd written on the page. And that's kind of what we were trying to do. So you start off with a great script that he had, which he won the Oscars for, obviously. You don't want to mess with it too much. You don't want to be, you got to figure out ways to make it work and realize it in a way that's going to be really effective. And it was incredibly exciting to be able to do that. Such a joy.
Fantastic. I could continue to nerd out with you guys for another 4 or 5 hours and continue to discuss the work, but we do have to, we got to cut it off here. And I got to say thank you to all three of you very much for joining us here for the Manhattan Edit Workshop and for the sight, sound, and story behind the lens on horror films. Thank you to you three gentlemen. And we're going to turn it back over to our host.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, thanks. I'm freaking out. I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. Amazing insight from the panelists. I want to thank James Kniest, Toby Oliver, ACS, Checco Varese, ASC, and Jay Holben for a great evening. I also want to thank our sponsors, OWC, American Cinema Editors, and HAA. And finally, look for our next event slated for November 11th, featuring the DP and colorist from the upcoming Netflix film, Passing. Thanks again for watching, and happy Halloween.